The money was still sitting in her account, untouched, but Ann Jenkins was already dead. This is one of the most oldest and brutal crime in history. So brutal that even the police refused to release the real images and body cam footage. So we're going to meet using AI images. If you are satisfied with the AI images, please like and share, because what you're about to hear will shock you. To the call. Where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories. The officer paused at the doorway longer than he should have. Something about the silence inside the house didn't feel normal. It wasn't just quiet. It was controlled quiet. The kind that feels like something happened. And the house itself is still, holding its breath. No broken windows, no forced entry, no overturned furniture and chaos. But inside the bedroom, Ann Jenkins lay on the floor, motionless, her presence already fading from the room. And the most disturbing part was not what was missing, but what was still there. Her phone, her wallet, her valuables, even the lottery winnings she had recently received were untouched. Nothing had been stolen, so why was she dead? 3 weeks earlier, Ann Jenkins was alive in a completely different world, a world where she still believed she was finally safe. She had lived a quiet life after her divorce. Not wealthy, not struggling in an obvious way, just surviving, carefully balancing work, raising her child, and trying to rebuild something stable after a marriage that had slowly broken her down. Her marriage didn't end in one moment. It ended in patterns, control disguised as concern, decisions made for her instead of with her, conversations that always ended with her giving in just to keep peace. Her ex-husband wasn't violent in a way people immediately notice. He was controlling in a way that feels reasonable on the surface, and that made it harder to escape. Even after divorce, he remained present, through custody discussions, through communication about their child, through small interactions that always seemed to carry an undercurrent of pressure. Ann learned to live around it, not free from it, just adjusted to it. Then everything changed with something so random it almost felt unreal. A lottery ticket, one ordinary purchase. No expectation, no fantasy attached, just a small moment of chance. But when the numbers matched, everything in her life shifted instantly. Enough to erase debt, enough to rebuild, enough to finally step away from the life she had been stuck in. For the first time in years, Ann smiled without tension behind it. She started planning differently, talking differently, thinking about moving, thinking about independence in a way she had stopped allowing herself to imagine. Friends noticed immediately. She was lighter, quieter in her stress, more hopeful. But hope has a way of being noticed by the wrong people too. When her ex-husband found out about the win, his reaction seemed normal at first. Congratulations. Questions, curiosity. Nothing aggressive, nothing obvious. But slowly the tone changed. The questions became more specific. How are you going to manage it? Where will you keep it? Have you thought about custody adjustments, now that your situation has changed? At first, Ann answered normally, politely, cautiously, but the pattern didn't stop. It continued, repeatedly, each conversation circling the same topic in different forms. Money, control, access. And slowly, Ann began to feel something she had felt before during the marriage. Pressure that didn't look like pressure on paper. She started pulling back. Short answers, delayed responses, less information shared. She began protecting her plans quietly. But distance doesn't always stop someone who is used to closeness on their terms. Instead, it sometimes escalates things in ways you don't immediately see. Arguments returned, not loud at first, controlled, measured, but sharper than before. Custody discussions became tense again. Small disagreements became longer conversations. And every interaction started to feel like a negotiation instead of co-parenting. Ann confided in a close friend that something felt off, but she didn't go into full detail. She didn't want drama. She just wanted peace. But peace was already slipping. 3 weeks after the lottery win, Ann stopped responding. At first, no one worried. People missed calls. People get busy, but Anne wasn't that type of person. She always responded. Always. By the second day of silence, concern began to grow. By the third, someone went to check on her. And that was when everything changed. The house looked normal from the outside. That was the first disturbing detail. Nothing broken, nothing forced, nothing unusual. But inside, the atmosphere felt completely different, like something had ended there recently. Police arrived quickly. The investigation began immediately. And within minutes, one fact stood out. There was no sign of robbery. Everything valuable remained untouched, which meant whoever was inside wasn't there for theft. They were there for something else entirely. Then came the signs of struggle, not dramatic destruction, but controlled disruption. A shifted chair, a slightly moved object, a pattern that suggested resistance, followed by stillness. This wasn't a random attack. This was targeted, personal, intentional. Investigators began reconstructing her final hours. Phone data, messages, location tracking, and one name appeared repeatedly in the background of her life, her ex-husband. He wasn't immediately accused. He was simply part of the natural circle of investigation. But as details were gathered, inconsistencies began to appear. He said he hadn't seen her that day. He said he had been elsewhere. But parts of his timeline didn't fully align with verifiable data. Not enough to accuse, but enough to focus. Then investigators looked deeper into their communication. That's when the emotional pattern became clear. The messages had changed over time. Early conversations were calm, functional, cooperative. But after the lottery win, the tone shifted. More questions, more pressure, more insistence on financial discussions, more subtle control attempts. And in between the lines, frustration, loss of influence, loss of certainty. Friends of Anne added another layer. She had become cautious, not paranoid, but careful. She stopped sharing financial details. She started limiting conversations. She mentioned feeling like she needed to keep things to herself now. That sentence alone changed how investigators viewed the case. Then came a critical discovery. Days before her death, Anne had been preparing to make changes. Legal protections, financial boundaries, steps that would reduce external access to her assets and decisions. It wasn't aggressive. It was protective. But for someone already used to having influence, it represented something else. Loss. Investigators now focused on timing, because everything happened too quickly after that shift. The lottery win, the tension, the distance, the silence. Then the death. A narrow time window emerged, a gap between verified movements and claimed location. Small, but important. And in cases like this, small gaps often decide everything. Then physical evidence confirms something critical. Not dramatic, not obvious, but precise enough to place him closer to her than he admitted. Closer than expected. Closer than his story allowed. And once that detail surfaced, the investigation shifted direction permanently. When questioned again, his behavior didn't change dramatically. No panic, no visible stress, just controlled denial, careful answers, measured responses. But investigators had seen this pattern before. Control under pressure often breaks in data before it breaks in people. And the data was already speaking. Financial awareness confirmed he knew about the win early. Message patterns confirmed increasing tension. Witness statements confirmed emotional distance forming. And physical evidence confirmed proximity. Each layer alone wasn't enough, but together, they formed something difficult to ignore. The central question became unavoidable. Was the lottery win the cause? Or was it the trigger for something already there? Because before the money, there was control. After the money, there was fear of losing it. Fear of permanent separation. Fear of losing influence completely. Investigators began to understand the motive differently. It wasn't about the money itself. It was about what the money allowed Anne to become. Independent, unreachable, free. Then came the final breakthrough. A piece of evidence that tied presence, timing, and opportunity together in a way that could not be explained away. At that moment, the narrative collapsed. Not slowly, not gradually, but decisively. What remained was a pattern that pointed in one direction: calculated timing, familiar access, knowledge of routine, emotional escalation tied to loss of control. This wasn't random violence. It was the end result of a situation that had been building quietly for years. And the lottery win didn't create it. It exposed it. Ann Jenkins had finally reached freedom. But freedom in her case came with visibility. And visibility sometimes attracts the one thing you cannot prepare for: control that refuses to disappear. In the end, the house remained unchanged. The money remained untouched. Everything was exactly where she left it, except her. Gone. And the most disturbing part wasn't how she died. It was how long the pattern had been building before anyone noticed it was already too late. The case should have been straightforward. At least that's what investigators thought in the beginning. A dead woman, no forced entry, no stolen items, a recent lottery win, a strange relationship with her ex-husband. On paper, it looked like a familiar pattern, but the deeper they went, the less familiar it became. The first breakthrough didn't come from a confession. It came from something much quieter: a timeline gap. A small window of time where nothing was fully accounted for, just over an hour. Not enough to look dramatic, but enough to change everything. Investigators went back to the basics: CCTV footage, phone pings, vehicle movement logs. They reconstructed every possible movement around Ann's home that day. And that's when something strange appeared. Her ex-husband's phone showed activity in an area that didn't match his statement, not far enough to immediately prove anything, but close enough to raise questions. When questioned again, he adjusted his explanation. He said he had stopped somewhere briefly. A quick errand. Something unplanned. But investigators noticed something important. The explanation came after the data was mentioned, not before. That shift mattered. Because in investigations like this, truth usually comes first. Adjustments come later. Then came something even more important: digital messages between Ann and her ex-husband in the days before her death were analyzed more deeply. At first glance, they looked like normal co-parenting communication. But under closer review, patterns stood out. Repeated references to money, indirect pressure, subtle emotional shifts disguised as concern. And one repeated theme underneath everything. Control. One message stood out in particular. Not because it was aggressive, but because it was calm. Too calm. He wrote, "You're moving too fast with everything. Think carefully. Things can change quickly." At the time, it looked like advice. After her death, it looked different. Meanwhile, investigators interviewed people closest to Ann, her co-workers, her friends, even neighbors, and a pattern began forming. Ann had not been afraid openly, but she had become cautious. She stopped sharing details about her finances. She avoided talking about her plans. She double-checked locks more often. Small changes, not enough for alarm, but enough for hindsight to feel uncomfortable. Then investigators found something critical: a financial consultation record. Ann had visited a legal advisor. The purpose wasn't just general planning. She'd been asking about limiting financial access, protecting assets, and restructuring control over her winnings. That detail changed the direction of the case again, because it suggested something important. Ann wasn't just enjoying her win. She was actively protecting it from someone specific, and that someone was already under investigation. At this point, the ex-husband was brought in again. This time, the questioning was different, stronger, more focused, less conversational, more direct. He still denied involvement, still maintained he had nothing to do with her death, still insisted the timeline was consistent. But investigators now had something new, not proof of guilt, but proof of inconsistency. And in cases like this, inconsistency is everything. They confronted him with the phone location data again. This time more precisely, stronger framing, tighter timeline. And for the first time, a pause appeared in his responses. Not panic, not emotion, just hesitation. A moment too long. A pause that didn't match confidence. He repeated his earlier explanation. but slightly differently. A word changed, a detail shifted. Not enough for him to notice, but enough for investigators to note. Then came the forensic breakthrough. A trace element found at the scene was matched to a secondary location, connected to him. Not direct evidence of action, but evidence of proximity, presence, opportunity. The case was slowly tightening, not through one big revelation, but through accumulation, layer by layer, piece by piece, until denial started to feel heavier than explanation. Then investigators revisited motive again, and this time the picture became clearer. Before the lottery win, control was already present. After the win, control was threatened. And when control is threatened in long-term relationships, people react in ways they don't always admit later. Anne's independence wasn't just emotional. It was financial, legal, structural. She was preparing to separate completely, not just personally, but practically. And that created pressure, not visible pressure, but internal escalation, the kind that builds quietly, until something breaks. Investigators now believed the timeline was not random. It followed emotional stages. Shock at the win, increased monitoring, escalating tension, loss of influence, final separation planning, then silence. Every stage connected. Every shift made the next one more likely. The case had reached the point where silence no longer helped anyone. Not the investigators, not the family, and definitely not the man sitting across from them for the final time. Because by now, the question was no longer whether something had happened. The question was how much of it could actually be proven in court. The courtroom was quieter than expected. No dramatic outbursts. No emotional collapse. Just tension. Heavy, controlled tension. The kind that sits in the air before something final is said. Anne Jenkins's family sat in the front row, motionless, listening, waiting, trying to understand how everything had led to this moment. The prosecution laid out the timeline first, carefully, step by step. Anne's lottery win, the immediate shift in relationship dynamics, the increasing communication pressure, the financial discussions that became more controlling in tone, and finally, the final days, where contact became more tense, more urgent, more fractured. Then came the key point. The prosecution didn't focus on one single moment. They focused on patterns. Because patterns, they argued, don't lie. They showed messages, repeated questions about money, repeated attempts to influence decisions, repeated reminders about thinking carefully. Each one on its own looked harmless. But together, they built something heavier, something intentional. Then came the timeline reconstruction, the hour-long gap that investigators had found, the vehicle placement, the phone location data, the movement analysis, all placed carefully into a single sequence. Not dramatic, not loud, just consistent, too consistent to ignore. The defense tried to push back. They pointed out missing direct evidence. No eyewitness. No clear recording of the act itself. No confession. They argued coincidence, misinterpretation, assumption built on emotion rather than fact. But the prosecution didn't need emotion. They had structure, and structure was harder to break. Then came the forensic discussion. The trace evidence that had placed him near key locations around the estimated time frame. Not definitive on its own, but powerful when combined with everything else. Because no single piece of this case was designed to stand alone. It was designed to connect. The courtroom listened as investigators explained something critical. Anne was not killed in a moment of chaos. There were no signs of panic-based violence. Everything suggested control, familiarity, access, a situation where the victim did not expect immediate danger. That detail shifted the atmosphere in the room, because it reframed everything. This was not random. This was proximity. Then came the final argument from the prosecution. They spoke about control, not just financial control, but emotional control, long-term relational control, and what happens when that control begins to disappear suddenly. They described the lottery win not as a cause, but as a disruption, a sudden shift in power dynamics. And the lottery win didn't create danger. It revealed how fragile the balance had always been. In the end, the money remained untouched, still sitting in the account, still exactly where it was left, almost like a reminder that what was meant to bring freedom can sometimes expose what was never truly gone. And Ann Jenkins' story ended the way many people never expect. Not with celebration, not with escape, but with silence that came too soon. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because stories like isn't just for entertainment. It's a warning and also to spread awareness around the world. Thanks for watching.